In the last section, we started writing our first component. What we have so far is a plain JavaScript function that returns some JSX. JSX being the stuff that looks like HTML. The function is assigned onto the constant app, and we use constant instead of var because we don't expect this variable to ever change. We're not going to reassign app at any given time. So let's talk a little bit more about what JSX is doing for us and then move on to the next step. I want to mention to you that JSX, just like the ES6 code that we're writing with const, cannot be interpreted by the browser. So remember, the purpose of our boilerplate package here with Webpack and Babel is to translate this JSX into actual vanilla JavaScript that can be understood by our browser. So you might be curious, well, what is the purpose of JSX? Why do we write this at all? Why does it exist inside of this function? We use JSX like this because this is what produces the actual HTML that gets inserted into the DOM when we render this component. And when I say render, I mean place this component's HTML onto the page. So this JSX right here gets turned into HTML, which in turn gets placed onto our page, into our DOM, into our document. It's what the user ends up seeing. So the purpose of JSX is to have some JavaScript code that can produce, ultimately, HTML. Now you might be wondering, why does it look like HTML at all? Why don't we have some type of just normal JavaScript calls? Well, we don't have to write JSX if we don't want to, but I really guarantee you're probably going to want to. Let's look at what this JSX looks like in vanilla JavaScript. Remember, JSX gets transpiled to vanilla JavaScript, just normal looking JavaScript. So I'm going to copy all this code right here, and I'm going to flip over to a code here, or excuse me, a tool here, which is a ES6 REPL. So I'm going to, on the left-hand side, I'm going to paste in the code, and on the right-hand side, it's going to be turned into vanilla JavaScript. So just ES5 JavaScript that can be ran safely inside of our browser. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this, and you'll see, okay, we get two kind of weird-looking variables up here, whatever, but we also get our JSX turned into a call to a function called react.createElement. The first argument is a div, and the third argument is hi, the content that's inside of the div over here. So this is why we use JSX in the first place. It gets compiled into vanilla JavaScript, but it's really ugly. We don't want to be typing this out by hand whenever we write a component. We want to just write something that looks very clean, very concise. You can look at this code over here on the left-hand side and say, okay, this function right here will return some JSX that ultimately is going to look like a div with content hi. If you look at it over here on the right-hand side, well, this is really hard to figure out what's going on, right? JSX can also be nested inside of itself just like normal HTML. So if I want to, I can add, say, a OL with a couple of LIs. Now look what we get on the right-hand side. We've got react.createElement, and it's going to make an OL, and then as a argument provided to it, it gets another, so this is the third argument, and the fourth and the fifth right here, with additional calls to create element with type li and content 1, 2, and 3. So as our components start to get more complex with a lot more JSX inside them, as we start to write more complicated components that have more JSX inside of it, that in turn produces more HTML, the JavaScript that gets produced gets more complicated as well. So you can imagine if we start to get really complex components, they get just about illegible on the JavaScript side. So that's the purpose of JSX. It's to make our components a lot more clean, a lot more legible to see what's going on. Okay, so enough on JSX. Let's get back to our code in the next section and continue on.